You've been trying to fix yourself for years, reading the right books, repeating the right affirmations, pushing harder, feeling less, chasing more, and yet, here you are, still stuck, still anxious, still waking up with that quiet knot in your stomach, as if you're already behind the moment you open your eyes. No one sees it, because on the outside, you're doing everything right, but inside, it's chaos. Your chest is tight, your mind doesn't stop, and you're exhausted from pretending that all this growth is actually working. Let me ask you something. What if your self-improvement routine is the very reason you feel broken? What if the reason you can't feel peace is because you've been taught to hate who you are, in the name of becoming someone else? Every time you repeat discipline over feelings, you betray the part of you that's still bleeding. Every time you say, be your best self, you fracture who you are right now into someone unacceptable. Every time you cut people off, silence your emotions, push through the burnout, you're not evolving, you're disappearing. You were promised transformation, but what they sold you was self-rejection wrapped in productivity quotes. They taught you to confuse trauma for motivation, shame for ambition, and exhaustion for progress. But listen, you're not lazy, you're not weak, you're not falling behind. You're just running a race that was never meant to heal you. This video isn't a pep talk. It's not another checklist. And it sure as hell isn't here to help you rewire your brain in 21 days. This is something deeper, something urgent. It's the intervention you didn't know you needed. Because once you see how the most popular truths of self-help are quietly destroying your nervous system, fragmenting your identity, and sedating your mind, you won't be able to unsee it. And from that clarity, something real can begin. So if part of you is tired of performing progress, if you feel like you've been emotionally disappearing behind a mask of discipline, then stay. Because the answer was never to improve yourself. It was to remember yourself before the noise, before the rules, before the shame. And that changes everything. You've heard it since you were a child. You can be anything. You're only limited by your mindset. Just dream bigger. It sounds empowering at first, but deep down, doesn't it feel like a trap? Like every time you don't succeed, it's not because of circumstances. It's because you didn't believe hard enough, because you failed you. And that's the first lie. What's sold as freedom is often quiet self-hatred in disguise. You were taught that if you weren't winning, thriving, or building something extraordinary every second, then you were wasting your potential, not living up to your best self, falling behind. So what do? You hustle harder, you stay up later, you consume more content, you burn through your nervous system trying to become someone who finally feels enough. But here's what's really happening. You're not chasing growth, you're running from shame. And the more you run, the more it grows. A heavy, invisible pressure, one that lives behind your eyes, tightens in your chest, and follows you into every productive day. B.F. Skinner, one of the pioneers of behavioral psychology, didn't talk about dreams or self-belief. He showed that environment shapes behavior more than intention, that what you become isn't just a product of mindset, but of conditioning, reinforcement, and invisible systems around you. And yet, self-help culture erased all of that nuance. It told you, if you're not growing, it's because you don't want it bad enough. That's not empowerment. That's psychological gaslighting. You are a living system, not a blank slate with infinite potential. You have nervous system limits, cognitive bandwidth, emotional capacity. You have context, trauma, culture, biology, history, shaping what's possible for you right now. And none of that makes you weak. It makes you real. But when you're conditioned to believe that your only limit is your imagination, you start to resent your own humanity. Your fatigue feels like failure. Your confusion feels like weakness. And your unmet dreams become evidence that you are broken. You're not broken. You're overloaded, overstimulated, overconditioned to chase an identity that doesn't even belong to you. And this leads us to the truth. Limits aren't enemies of growth. They're the architecture of your authenticity. They tell you where you are now, and that is sacred information. What if your limits aren't blocks to crush, but boundaries to understand? What if the most powerful version of you isn't the one who can be anything, but the one who learns how to be fully here? Because when you stop performing possibility and start honoring reality, you don't shrink, you finally fit. And that is the beginning of actual growth. You were told emotions are distractions, that they cloud judgment, that real strength means pushing past how you feel, no matter what. So you did. You silenced the sadness. You tightened your jaw when anger rose. You numbed the loneliness with productivity and called it discipline. And from the outside, it looked impressive, focused, unshakable, in control. But inside, you started to go numb, because when you teach yourself to override emotion in the name of progress, you don't just suppress pain, you sever connection to your body, to your needs, to the part of you that still remembers how to feel safe. That's the lie we need to expose. Discipline over feelings isn't mastery, it's mutilation. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research shows that emotions aren't irrational storms. They're constructed from patterns of experience, memory, and meaning. They're messages, data. Daniel Siegel calls this your window of tolerance, the space where your nervous system can process life without flooding or shutting down. But when discipline is used as a weapon against emotion, you start shrinking that window. You push too far, you disconnect. And the cost? Chronic stress, irritability, that tightness in your chest you can't quite name, that pressure behind your eyes that never really goes away. You call it hustle, you call it mental toughness, but your body is calling it dysregulation. And here's the brutal part. Every time you suppress a feeling, you're not becoming stronger, you're becoming less aware, less human, less present, less whole. This isn't about becoming emotionally fragile. It's about becoming emotionally fluent. Because when you actually listen to what your emotions are telling you, you gain clarity that discipline alone can never give. You stop pushing through exhaustion and start asking why you're exhausted. You stop numbing anxiety and start tracing its origin. You stop punishing yourself for feeling and start respecting what your nervous system is trying to communicate. And this leads us to a deeper truth. Regulated emotion is not the enemy of growth. It's the foundation of it. You want consistency? Learn how to return to safety, not just to structure. You want real discipline? Learn to feel without collapsing. Because when your internal world becomes a battlefield, you don't win by dominating it. You win by understanding it. So the next time your mind says, just push through, and your chest says, I can't breathe, listen. Because ignoring your emotions doesn't make you disciplined. It makes you disconnected. And the more disconnected you are, the easier it becomes to mistake survival for success. And that's not the life you're trying to build. So now that you've been taught to suppress what you feel, in the name of discipline, what's the next lie you're fed? Just rewire your brain. Change your habits, change your life. It's all about neuroplasticity. And sure, on paper, it sounds empowering. Scientific, simple. Rewire your brain like it's an app. Install discipline, delete fear. Done. But here's what's really happening. This kind of thinking turns your human complexity into a performance script. It reduces your emotional life to circuits. It ignores pain, trauma, memory, safety, and context, and replaces them with checklists and dopamine hacks. You're not a lab experiment. You're not a productivity robot with outdated firmware. You're a nervous system trying to protect itself. And the brutal truth? Most people aren't failing to rewire their brains. They're surviving conditions that never felt safe to begin with. Andrew Huberman talks extensively about how dopamine cycles work, how they rise, fall, and crash based on effort, novelty, and meaning. But what he never says is, just force it, because real change isn't a switch. It's a conversation with your biology. And if your nervous system is in defense mode, flooded with cortisol, braced for failure, trained to anticipate disappointment, no morning routine is going to override that. Daniel Siegel calls it mindsight, the ability to sense the internal landscape with clarity and compassion. But that clarity doesn't come from grinding, it comes from safety. And that's the part no one wants to talk about. Before you can rewire your brain, you have to repair the environment it lives in. Because what good is neuroplasticity if your mind is just building new habits on a foundation of shame? What good is a new mindset if it's just another mask to avoid what hurts? You see, when change doesn't happen fast, when you relapse, freeze, sabotage, you don't just feel stuck, you feel defective. You blame your willpower, your focus, your old patterns. But rarely do you stop and ask, was I ever safe enough to change at all? That's not laziness, that's biology. Your brain isn't wired to evolve in isolation, under pressure, in silence. It needs warmth, co-regulation, time, and most of all, it needs honesty. So if you've been beating yourself up for not being disciplined enough to change, stop. You're not broken. You're overriding pain with protocol. And this leads us to a deeper understanding. Neuroplasticity isn't a weapon. It's a whisper, a gentle, repeated signal that says, it's okay to become, slowly. So instead of forcing your brain to perform, start listening to what it's protecting you from. Because maybe the goal isn't to rewire it, but to finally hear it. So now you've been told to silence your feelings, override your biology, and rewire your brain like a machine. What's next? They say, just stay focused, eyes on the prize, block out the noise, grind. And at first, it feels noble. You build schedules, eliminate distractions, optimize your sleep, measure your steps, track your habits. You believe this is the path to success. But here's what's really happening. The moment you treat your life like a checklist, you stop living it. There's a quiet violence in constant optimization, one that doesn't scream, but suffocates. A tension that builds slowly, like a fist closing around your breath. You're not present. You're performing. You don't wake up. You boot up. The idea is simple. Focus hard enough, and you'll succeed. But what if focus without reflection isn't power? It's tunnel vision. Daniel Kahneman talks about two systems of thinking, fast and slow. The fast system reacts, solves, pursues. The slow system pauses, reflects, integrates. Most self-improvement advice trains you to live in the fast system, to never question the goal, only how to reach it faster. And that's where you begin to disappear, because the longer you stare at the target, the more you lose sight of the self behind the aim. You stop asking, do I even want this? Is this mine? Am I okay? Andrew Huberman's research on attention shows that laser focus comes at a neurological cost: fatigue, depleted dopamine, impaired creativity. But the deeper cost? You start to equate movement with meaning, efficiency with worth, completion with peace. And yet, nothing ever feels done, does it? Because the truth is, most of your goals were built in survival mode, constructed in moments when you didn't feel enough, projected from pain, not purpose. So every time you hit a milestone, there's no relief, just the next one, and the next, and the next. You're not chasing goals. You're trying to outrun the void. But that void isn't laziness. It's your unmet need for presence. It's the part of you begging to slow down, to look around, to feel again. You were never meant to function like an algorithm. You're not code to be optimized. You're a consciousness to be heard. And this leads us to a radical truth. Purpose doesn't come from intensity. It reveals itself in stillness. The more you fixate, the more meaning slips through your fingers. But when you soften your gaze, when you stop sprinting toward a finish line that keeps moving, you begin to feel something ancient, something honest. Not ambition, but alignment. So the next time your mind says focus harder, ask yourself, on what and for who? Because if the goal is pulling you out of yourself, maybe it's not a goal. Maybe it's a distraction in disguise. So now you've optimized your goals, focused relentlessly, and pushed everything else aside. But there's still something hollow, still something tight in your chest, still that whisper that says, you're not free yet. And that's when the next illusion shows up, wrapped not in hustle, but in spiritual language. Kill your ego, transcend your identity, detach from the self, become limitless. It sounds enlightened, elevated, but what if it's just another costume for shame? What if the demand to kill your ego is really just a polished way of saying, you, as you are unacceptable? Let's be clear. The ego isn't your enemy. It's not some villain lodged in your psyche that needs to be destroyed. It's your interface, the bridge between your inner world and everything else. Daniel Siegel refers to the self not as a fixed entity, but as a process, always shifting, integrating, evolving. And Søren Kierkegaard described the self as a synthesis, a tension between what we are and what we could become. But here's what's really happening. When self-help tells you to kill your ego, it rarely means integration. It usually means erasure. So you start performing humility, suppressing opinions, detaching from needs, calling it growth, while secretly losing your voice. You say yes when you mean no. You stay silent when something hurts. You replace conviction with neutrality, thinking that means you've evolved. But the truth is brutal. You're not dissolving the ego, you're abandoning it. And that's not spirituality, that's self-rejection with better lighting. The ego death rhetoric seduces you because it promises relief from pressure, from pain, from responsibility. But what it often delivers is collapse. You lose orientation. You can't trust your preferences, your instincts, your voice. You float in a vague cloud of oneness that feels more like dissociation than peace. Because what no one told you is this: your ego isn't the problem. Your relationship to it is. Integration isn't about silencing the self. It's about holding space for the parts of you that once had to perform, defend, or hide, and letting them finally rest. You don't need to kill your ego. You need to befriend it. Understand what it's protecting, where it was born, what it still fears, because that's where real peace lives, not in transcendence, but in intimacy with yourself. And this leads us to a deeper realization. Every time you abandon your identity in the name of growth, you reinforce the very wound you're trying to heal. So the next time someone tells you to let go of your ego, ask yourself, are they asking me to expand or to disappear? Because the goal isn't to become less of you, it's to become more honest about who you've always been. So now you've distanced yourself from your ego. You've been told peace comes from detachment, from letting go of identity, from transcending the self. And when that didn't work, when the emptiness remained, you were given a new solution, this time wrapped in hard boundaries and self-respect. Just cut them out. Protect your peace. If they don't add value, they don't belong in your life. At first it feels powerful, clean, assertive, righteous. You create a list: toxic, draining, negative, low vibe. You hit block, you stop replying, you walk away, and you convince yourself, this is healing. But here's what's really happening. Sometimes you're not setting boundaries, you're avoiding mirrors. Sometimes you're not removing toxicity, you're running from the part of yourself that still hasn't learned how to sit with discomfort or communicate it. The phrase "cut them out" has become a catch-all excuse to bypass accountability, nuance, and emotional maturity. It reduces relationships to transactions. It confuses disagreement with danger. It labels tension as abuse and difference as dysfunction. Of course, there are people who are truly unsafe, but the cultural obsession with elimination has turned growth through connection into growth through isolation. And that's a trap. Daniel Kahneman's research on attribution bias shows that we tend to externalize blame, assuming others are wrong without questioning our own role. Lisa Feldman Barrett reminds us that emotions are co-constructed. We don't just feel, we feel with. So when you cut everyone off at the first sign of friction, you don't heal, you delay. You don't evolve, you hide. You convince yourself you're protecting your energy, but what you're really protecting is your ego from exposure. The truth is brutal. Growth isn't sterile, it's relational, it's messy. It requires rupture and repair. The friend who triggered your jealousy, they weren't toxic. They revealed a part of you that still believes you're falling behind. The partner who challenged your story, they weren't controlling. They interrupted your comfort zone. You labeled them threats, but maybe they were invitations to communicate, to renegotiate, to feel. And this leads us to the deeper realization. Relationships aren't obstacles to healing. They're the terrain where healing happens. You don't become whole by filtering people like apps. You become whole by facing the discomfort they reflect and deciding who you want to be in response. So the next time you reach for the scissors, ask yourself, am I protecting my peace or avoiding my pain? Because cutting everyone out might keep you safe, but it can also keep your wounds open, just out of reach. After cutting people out, after drawing the lines and tightening your circle, you were left with one final command, the most socially rewarded form of self-destruction. Just keep going. No excuses, no days off. Grind harder. Hustle is the cure, and it works. For a while. You get that adrenaline hit from completing tasks. You feel proud when others call you disciplined. You stay busy enough not to feel the ache underneath. But here's what's really happening. You're not working from clarity. You're working from compulsion. And slowly, without even realizing it, you become addicted. Not to success, but to effort. The constant motion keeps the shame quiet. The dopamine spikes from micro-accomplishments keep your nervous system just stimulated enough to ignore the void. But eventually, your body starts whispering, then begging, then screaming. The tight jaw, the clenching stomach, the insomnia masked as, late-night productivity, the phantom guilt when you don't do something. This isn't discipline, it's nervous system dysregulation in disguise. Andrew Huberman's work on dopamine and attention shows us something vital. Your brain doesn't just crave reward, it adapts to the pace of reward. And when you flood it with constant effort, constant novelty, constant output, you burn out your baseline. Your rest no longer feels restful. Your stillness becomes terrifying, and recovery starts to feel like failure. You don't know how to pause, because pausing feels like disappearing. And this is where the trauma hides. Somewhere along the way, you internalize the belief that your worth is measured by how much you produce, not by who you are when you stop. So you stay in motion, not because it's effective, but because stopping feels like death. That's not hustle. That's survival mode, dressed in ambition. You're not chasing progress. You're reliving a wound, the one where being still meant being forgotten, where rest felt unsafe, where success became the only language love would understand. But this leads us to a necessary rupture. Real strength isn't in how much you push. It's in your ability to pause without collapsing. Discipline means knowing when to act. Wisdom means knowing when to stop. And courage? Courage is watching the world spin while you sit still and breathe. So the next time your mind screams work harder, ask yourself, is this growth? Or is this a reenactment of pain I've never named? Because you don't need to earn rest. You need to reclaim it. You don't need another goal. You need to remember what it feels like to be here, without trying to outrun yourself, because maybe the bravest thing you can do today is nothing at all. So you've pushed, you've cut, you've optimized, you've chased a version of you that never quite arrived. And when the hustle got heavy, when your body begged for pause, when your relationships grew quiet and your joy turned mechanical, they gave you one final illusion to cling to: be your best self. But here's what's really happening. That phrase doesn't free you. It fractures you. It creates two of you. The now you, who is flawed, unfinished, always behind. And the ideal you, flawless, focused, fearless, who only exists in imagination. You wake up each morning already in battle with yourself. You feel the weight in your chest before you even move. A quiet war between who you are and who you think you should be. And every time you fall short of the routine, the mindset, the expectation, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel ashamed. But you need to hear this. That fantasy version of you is not your salvation, it's your prison. Because the more you chase the best self, the more you abandon the one who needs you now. You turn healing into a checklist, growth into performance, presence into a project. But what if the problem was never that you're not enough? What if the real problem is that you've been rejecting your wholeness in the name of constant upgrade? Søren Kierkegaard said the self is a synthesis, not a perfect version to arrive at, but a living balance between who you are and who you're becoming. Lisa Feldman Barrett shows us that emotions are predictions built from memory. So when your past holds shame, your future gets shaped by fear. And the more you try to outperform that fear, the more you stay inside it. You're not meant to be your best self. You're meant to be your honest self, the one who feels deeply, who falters, who wakes up some days heavy and still chooses to show up anyway. Because that version of you, that's the one who heals, not by being perfect, but by being real. And this leads us to the moment you've been searching for. The transformation isn't out there. It's in here, right now, in the breath you're taking, in the self you've spent years trying to outrun. Let that version finally catch up to you. Let them speak. Let them rest. Let them exist, without needing to prove, perform, or pretend. Because when you stop trying to become, you finally start to belong. So if you've been waiting for permission to slow down, to stop fighting yourself, to be seen in your full complexity, this is it. Not your best day, not your final form, just you, alive and worth listening to. This isn't the end of your growth. It's the beginning of your return. If you've made it this far, there's a reason. Not because you're broken, not because you needed fixing, but because something in you, quiet, buried, but alive, recognized a deeper truth. You've been trying so hard to improve that you forgot how to simply be. You weren't lazy, you weren't weak, you were surviving, following the rules, the scripts, the promises, trying to do everything right, and still feeling wrong. That wasn't your fault. It was the system, the culture that profits from your shame, the language of be better that masked you're not enough. And somewhere in the noise, you started believing it. You believed that discipline meant denying your body, that emotions were obstacles, that burnout was a badge, that growth required isolation, that rest made you regress, that the real you was still out there, waiting in some future version of perfection. But you're here now, and here's the truth they never taught you. You don't need to be your best self. You need to be your whole self, the one who's been hurt and healing, disciplined and tired, capable and confused, still becoming, but already enough. Self-improvement told you to build a better version of yourself, but integration invites you to come home to the one that's already here. It's not about more effort, it's about more honesty. And once you begin seeing that, once you stop running from the parts of you that feel inconvenient or unproductive or not optimized, you stop living in performance mode. You start living in truth mode. And from there, everything shifts. Your habits become rituals. Your limits become boundaries. Your feelings become intelligence. Your presence becomes power. Not the kind they sell you. Not the kind that burns you out. But the kind that builds you back. Slowly, softly, sustainably. So here's your invitation. Don't keep this video to yourself. If something clicked, if something cracked open, share it with the version of you who needed this 5 years ago, with someone in your life who's been quietly crumbling behind a mask of strength. Leave a comment. Let this space be real. Tell us, which part hit hardest? Which lie have you been living under? What truth are you ready to step into now? And if you're ready to go deeper, to stop chasing hacks and start building inner clarity, subscribe. This channel isn't about selling you another blueprint. It's about helping you remember who you are beneath all of them. Because growth isn't becoming someone new. It's returning to the you who never had permission to exist fully, until now. And that's not just change. That's liberation. That's integration. That's you. Finally, completely, here.